Hi, I'm James Eade of the Eade Foundation, but you could call me Jim. I'm getting off to a slow start today. You know, it's going to be the end of daylight savings time or the start of, I don't know, but there's a time change coming up, and I just am all out of whack. I don't know why, but this is maybe the best time to announce that this is the season finale of the Chess Files. The answers are out there. And I've been doing this. This is the 52nd episode, so I thought it was fitting take a little break, but we will be back. But in order to end the season on a big up note, I asked a special guest to come and talk about his career. I'm going to give you a little hint about who the guest is. Oh, the Chess Life. You know, I've never been on the cover of Chess Life. Oh my gosh, this is just embarrassing. But I'm going to ask John Donaldson to join me right now. John, thank you.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yes. You know, John, you and I share so many chess stories. Let me just change my screen because it doesn't quite fit into my tiny little screen. So I'm going to get a little background change here, and that might look a little better. So, you know, because I'm really fussy about how I look. And but the thing is, John, you know, we've had so much overlap in our chess careers, but there's so many things that you have accomplished that I've had nothing to do with. And I wanted to ask you about some of those things. To get started, I'd like to ask you, like, where you're from, where do you live now, and how'd you get started playing chess?
Well, I'll start with the latter question. I was growing up in Tacoma, Washington. My father was the city manager there, and I sort of knew how to play chess. I wasn't yet acquainted with the en passant rule, but the rest of it I sort of had mastered. And of course, in the summer of 1972, there was the Fischer-Spassky match, and all my friends and I followed it. And that fall, I joined the Tacoma Chess Club, and that was a very important moment in my life. That's what really got me started as a chess player. And I made a lot of friends there, Eric Tangborn, Dan Bailey, Neil Salmon. You know, not long after I met Yasser Seirawan, who was from Seattle but played in Tacoma. So that was really, you know, the first day I stepped into the Tacoma Chess Club in the fall of 1972. You know, I think there were maybe over 100 people in the club. You know, it was a Fischer boom, and there was a tournament going on. And I remember coming home that evening, and my parents were alarmed because I just reeked of smoke. Those are the days when you could smoke, and so my parents had thought I'd become a juvenile delinquent. You know,
of course,
overnight. So I have a lot of memories of that time.
Yeah, well, you know, that's one thing we have in common. I played my first tournament game in 1972 for the same reason. You know, it was part of the Bobby Fischer boom. But I think I'm considerably older than you. I was born in 1957.
No, you're just a year older. I was born in September 24th of 58. I always like to tell John Fedorowicz I'm his older brother because I was born 3 days before him.
There you go. Yeah, well, you know, you just look younger. That's my grudge against you. The thing is, John, you got started playing and in Tacoma. So you think of that as your home, the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, that's where I grew up. I mean, my senior year of high school, I was my father took another position, a larger position in Cincinnati, and that's when you know, that's where I graduated high school from, and I made a lot of friends there as well, and had a really great time and they had a very good chess club there as well. And then later, my father took a job as the zoo director in Philadelphia, and so that got me all the way to the East Coast. You know, most people work their way west, but my father, for some reason, worked his way east.
Go East, old man.
Yes, and then of course later, thanks to you and Mark Pinto, I landed the position at the Mechanics Institute Chess Club as the director, and that was in the fall of 1998, and that was definitely another one of those like really important moments in my life.
Yes, you mentioned Mark Pinto. He's a trustee, a longtime trustee at the Mechanics Institute, a gem of in the chess world, a dedicated chess room. It's built into the charter, which is, I think, dating back to 1854 or something like that. That there
Mhm.
would be a chess room. It's a library, and so most of the floors are dedicated to books or to renting out to clients and stuff like that. But there's a floor that's the chess room that is a special place, and I was the director of that before you, but I was basically begging for you to take it. And Mark and I approached you in Hawaii. I think the U.S. Open was in Hawaii one year, and we both independently tackled you and said, "Please do this."
Yeah, no, it was the 20 years I spent at the Mechanics were quite memorable ones, and I'm very glad that the person that I passed the baton to, Abel Talamontes, and his assistant Dr. Judith Azare, uh, they've done a really fantastic job, especially through the pandemic, in keeping the Mechanics, busy as ever.
I couldn't agree more. I've had them both on at different times, but what they've done during the pandemic, the chess room itself was shut down. So they kept the membership, the community alive through the online chess world, and I just tip my hat to both of them for doing that. But John, one of the things about your work in the mechanics, and this is a general characteristic that I'm going to point out for our viewing audience, hi mom, is that you wrote the history, a history of the chess room. Am I wrong in that, or?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, I was greatly assisted in doing it by the late Steve Brandwine, who did a lot of the research.
Shout out to Steve Brandwine wherever he is. Yes, I absolutely adored him, and he was a great researcher. If he didn't know the answer, which was rare to your question, he would go look it up and come back to you and give you the answer. So yeah, but that was a great book that I thought was just you had the Before the Fire, the Great Fire of 1906, which was the only time that wasn't the continuously in operation.
Well, actually, you're right in the sense that for a few weeks it was stopped, and
Right.
it is true that the building wasn't, refinished for a couple of years. But the mechanics had a temporary fix where they had this pavilion where they had other land that they owned that was outside of the fire zone, and so they set up a makeshift, chess and library uh, for the transition between their older building and the new building they rebuilt on the same grounds.
Yes. So it's the oldest continuing operating chess club in the United States. Is that?
That is definitely right. I think after that it's tricky. The Franklin Mercantile, the Franklin and the Mercantile, they merged in the 1950s, but I think both of them have histories before 1900, so they probably come in second and or third or second, if you will.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Marshall Chess Club, dates to about the First World War. Not at the current location, but they moved around. I think maybe 1914 they were founded in Keene's Chop House, a local steakhouse, and then they kind of moved around for a bit before they got their current home. And there have been other clubs also that have even ones you'd think all the older clubs would be on the East Coast,
Yes.
but there's some like Portland Chess Club, Seattle Chess Club. They go a long way back, but the thing with them is it's kind of hard to trace their history because unlike the Mechanics and unlike the Marshall and unlike the Mercantile, they didn't have their own building that they rented. So they were, there were probably periods where they were temporarily out of action,
Right.
but it's sort of impossible to track.
That's why the Marshall and the Mechanics are such gems in the ocean of chess, because they do have the dedicated facilities. Because you can, if you're renting, you can get kicked out. and so the ability to stay in one location is almost priceless. It's
Mhm.
hard to replicate. So
Yeah.
I just can't say enough about those two places in the world of chess. So much history in both places. Some of the world champions are famous. You've documented some of like Lasker visiting the mechanics.
Yes, he visited twice. He visited, I believe, in 1903 and 1926, and the thing was in those days when they would visit, it wouldn't just be like a one night simul. It would be like an extended stay for like a week or so because the economics, especially on the West Coast, were such that between Los Angeles and San Francisco there wouldn't be any stops, and also Los Angeles in 1903 wasn't a particularly big city. It was much smaller than San Francisco. So it could have been that he went from somewhere like Salt Lake City to San Francisco, and then he's got to go all the way back again. And so it takes a lot of time. So if you're going to make it to the West Coast, you're definitely going to
Stick around.
at that time spend a little time there. And so he played not only simuls and gave lectures, but also played offhand games with members.
Yeah. And so what are some of the other, who are some of the other world champions that visited?
Well, pretty much every world champion from Steinitz, who was the first in 1886, he did not make it to the mechanics. But after him was Lasker. And so Lasker to, say, Kasparov, the champions of the 20th century, everybody made it to the mechanics except for Kasparov and Botvinnik. But all the rest, the Elekines, the Capablancas, the Ervas, the Talls, the Smyslovs, Petrosians, Karpov was the last to visit. Spassky, they all paid visits. Actually, Spassky was in the early 2000s, mid 2005 or so.
Yeah.
I
got to watch Tal play Patrick Wolf in the mechanics.
Yes, right, because you and Neil Falconer and Max Wilkerson were the organizers of that Pan Pacific, one of the last tournaments of Tal's life in 1991. It was held in Chinatown, but Tal flew from the Soviet Union, as it was still then, I believe, to San Francisco, and he did it on Aeroflot, which was the most convenient for his schedule and probably the most, probably a reasonably economic way to go. But it involved multiple stops to, Shannon, Ireland, and then to Ganders, Newfoundland, and then all the way to, Vancouver and then down. And that was good for Tal because I think by those days you weren't allowed to smoke on the planes. And so Tal liked the multiple stops, because he needed his nicotine fix.
He went out of his way to schedule multiple stops, probably.
Probably so.
Well, so did Bobby Fischer ever play at the mechanics?
Yes, he did. He played in '64. He gave a simul there at the mechanics that year on 50 boards. And he had been at the club before in 1957, the U.S. Junior Open.
Oh, yes.
Or it was just called the U.S. Junior then because there was no closed tournament. It was all the best junior players in the country. And he took first, and Gil Ramirez, a local, was second. And he spent about a week after that kind of hanging around the club. One of the things that was very popular in those days when chess clocks were not that common was that they played a lot of like move on move chess. And you move, I move, you move, I move. It was kind of on the honor system, but it was almost like bullet chess. And he did it in tandem with Gil Ramirez as his partner. So that, when I did my book, Bobby Fischer in This World, when I was doing the research for it, I ran into some mechanics old timers that remembered that. And they also remembered the late William Addison, one of the strongest players in the United States never to become a GM. He was an IM, like rated 2490 FIDE.
And a former director.
And he was not, he had not yet assumed the position as director of the mechanics, but in the late 50s, he was a 2300 plus master. So he was showing a lot of endgame studies to Bobby, who was solving them very quickly. And of course, all of you will know that that summer of 57 was a very important time in Bobby's career. It was at the end of that summer in August that he went to the U.S. Open in Cleveland. He actually left from the mechanics, and one of the key persons at the mechanics, Guthrie McLean, lent Bill Addison his car, and it was Bill and like 4 or 5 other teenagers, Ramirez and Fischer among them, and John Ronaldo, I think, was another. And they drove. This is before I-80, which would be the natural route to get between San Francisco and Chicago. And so they drove in like McLean's vehicle, and so they were, driving across, Utah, empty spaces. So Bobby got a good road trip in, but the car broke down somewhere in, I believe, in Nebraska, and they paid for the repair and they moved on. But then it, in either Peoria or Joliet, it broke down a second time, and they were really afraid that, like McLean, like, what did you do to my car? Yeah. So they got on the bus, and then they met him. He flew to Cleveland expecting to see his car there, not realizing he would have to get a ride back to pick it up in Illinois. And it turned out it was some small part or something. But at any rate, I sometimes think that when they had all those interviews with Fischer in the 1990s, like in, say, 1992 during his rematch with Spassky, or in 96 when he was in Argentina, when he was doing his Fischer random chess, talks, I wish somebody had asked him, instead of, questions about chess politics and things like that, they just said, "Hey, Bobby, do you remember that trip you made from the mechanics to Cleveland?" Yeah. I would have, because he had a great memory. It would have been fun to hear some of the stories he had to say.
Yeah, and to piggyback on this, I want to say shout out to Neil Falconer, a longtime trustee of the Mechanics Institute and the primary organizer of that 1991. I had a very bit part in that. I was more involved in the 95. I was the chief organizer of that tournament. Tal was no longer with us at that time. That was won by Korchnoi, though. So these were big tournaments. And Mark Pinto was one of the, Neil Falconer, Mark Pinto, and I were the organizing committee for the 95 one. So both Neil and Mark's service to the Mechanics Institution can't go without mentioning. And Guthrie is emphasizing. And Guthrie McLean, I never got the chance to meet him, but he was a big buddy of Bob Berger, who was also a trustee of the Mechanics. And he wrote a book about Bobby Fischer, as you did. And Guthrie and Bob were very involved in publishing the Chess Reporter, or was that right?
The California Chess Reporter.
California Chess
75 from 1951 to about 1975.
Thank you.
76, something like that.
Your memory is so much sharper than mine, and also what I was so impressed about the quality of diagrams in that. It was amazing for the times.
Yes, it was. It really documented Northern California chess history really well. And I should say that the book by Berger, I think it's like The Chess of Bobby Fischer. It's a book worth seeking out. It takes a somewhat different approach. Berger was not just a 2,300 plus USCF rated master, but he was a world-class chess problemist. And so it's kind of a teaching book. He uses Fischer's games to show certain themes. For example, one of them is like the domination of the bishop over a knight. And I remember one of the examples he shows is Fischer's win over William Addison in that Cleveland 57 U.S. Open, where the knight's on e8, and he plays bishop e5 in an endgame and just totally dominates the knight and wins quite easily thereafter. So yeah, if you're ever visiting a used bookstore somewhere, or I think you might have your company might have reprinted it, Hypermodern Chess. You might have reprinted that back in.
Thank you for remembering. Yes, I did reprint it. So I worked with Bob extensively during that. A great character, a great, he was more of an advertising kind of guy, marketing, and he had really good relationship with Herb Cain. So he would get chess mentioned in Herb Cain's column from time to time, or when we had an important tournament going on at the Mechanics or associated with the Mechanics. So those are good memories. And Bob is no longer with us, but he was a great friend, and that was a great book. And I did republish it as Hypermodern Press. And thanks for reminding me of that. So the other things I wanted to say, you mentioned a book that you wrote. Is this it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, the Bobby Fischer and his world. So tell me a little bit about how did you go about doing this? How did you get this idea? Because I know you wrote about his schedule of his simultaneous exhibitions, and this, did that spark your interest in writing this book?
Indirectly, it did, in the sense that when I was gathering up games for the first edition of that book, which appeared in the 1990s, I met a lot of people that had hosted Fischer during that tour. It was at a time when Fischer was much more approachable, and he stayed at people's homes, or they drove him from one city to another for an exhibition. And the memories they shared with me were somewhat at odds with the later ways, ways Fischer's been portrayed. I think part of that can be attributed to the fact that like most of us, you change over time, but he changed maybe more than others. But he was very, very approachable in those days, and so. But anyway, this book was pretty much, I had read Endgame, Profile of a Prodigy, pretty much anything I could find that was Fischer related, and there's like over 100 books on him. If you go to Edward Winter's site, Chess History, there is a Chess Notes. There's a list of all the books on that have been ever published on Fischer. But after all that, I still had many questions. I had the opportunity to speak with a lot of people that knew Bobby, and I just had a lot of unanswered questions. So this book was an attempt to answer many of the questions I had. In many cases, I had a lot of help, and I was successful in answering the questions. And in some other cases, I don't know. Maybe the answer will never be known. But it was a very fun project to do. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about New York City and the chess there in the late 1950s and the 1960s. I think that people kind of tend to forget now that how much the chess scene there was an overachiever. And what I mean by that is USCF membership before the Fischer boom in the late 60s and early 70s was quite modest. In 1960, I don't think they had even 5,000 members. But that didn't stop them from producing a very good chess magazine, Chess Life. It started like around early 1960s. It had been in newspaper format before that. And, if you look at the chess players they had, Fischer, Lombardi, Evans, Benko, Reshevsky, they were battling with Yugoslavia and with Argentina for number 2 in the Olympiads. They really had a lot of quality chess being played in New York City, and I think if Fischer hadn't grown up there, frankly, there was no chance that he would have ever come close to achieving what he did. As an example of that, I point to Larry Remlinger, who at a similar age, that is like, from 11 to 13, say, was a markedly stronger player than Fischer was at the time, but being based in Long Beach, California, didn't have the sort of opportunities Bobby did. And by the time he got into the 2300s, he basically just sort of hit a plateau. So it was a very fun book to work on, and I've got 2 more in the pipeline. I've got one on Bobby Fischer and his writings, and I have another one on Fischer and his non-tournament games planned.
And Remlinger, interestingly enough, became an IM much later in life.
Yeah, he did. Obviously, he was a very talented player. Yeah. If he had been born, for example, in the Soviet Union instead of the United States at the same time, he would have become a grandmaster, as would have probably a lot of American players of that generation. Tony Sadie's a little bit older than Larry, but he's another example of a player who, worked a regular job during his life, in his case as a medical doctor, and played chess as an amateur, but a very keen one. And I think that if he, in his formative years had, access to good coaching and strong competition on a consistent basis, he would definitely have made it.
And even a guy that I got to know well was Walter Shipman. And, he would tell me that you just can't play against these guys part-time.
No. He's another good example of somebody who, worked as a lawyer. He was rated in the top 10 or 12 players in the U.S. around 1956. But, he was working, he had a family, and it was only when he retired early, he retired in his early 50s, I want to say, he became an IM, somewhere like around 52 or 53. And it was an example of, it wasn't like one of these former Soviet players who were always, who couldn't travel outside of the country. He could have traveled at any time, but he had these other boundaries, if you will, that prohibited him from playing in the type of tournaments that were needed to make norms. And once he had the path clear, he made it quite easily.
Yeah,
Also, he was also one of the great gentlemen of chess.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that I was going to save to the end, but John, you are as well. I have never heard anyone say bad things about you. Everyone has just complimentary things to say, because you don't get involved in the political fights. You don't get involved in these internet wars, flaming, and all of the stuff that goes on. You remain outside of that, and you've always conducted yourself impeccably well, even when you're representing the United States and overseas in FIDE. I just have to say, but Walter was that type of man as well. So I had great respect for him, and that's why you're on my season finale.
I'll settle just for being in the same sentence with Walter.
Yes. That brings me to another. You're listed, as a player, an author, a journalist, and a chess official. How do you want to be remembered?
Oh gosh, I would say that probably for the books I've written, and maybe also for the Olympiad teams. I've had the opportunity to serve as the U.S. national team captain for over 20 times in Olympiads, World Team Championships, Pan American Championships, what have you, and so I've had the opportunity to realize just how weak a player I am. Well, being amongst all the great players that have played for our Olympiad teams is a humbling experience, and the U.S. has done really well. I mean, obviously now it's very obvious we have like all these world-class players. Before we had very strong players, but not like top 10 or top 15 players, or if we did, not for very many of them. If you go back pre-Hikaru and pre-Gata, but we had a lot of depth, good team spirit, and I think back to the 1990s, the team that won the World Team Championship in '93 and nearly repeated in '97. Those teams, they were very balanced. The difference between board 1 and board 6, because that's the second reserve, and in those days they did play on 6 boards and not 5, was very small. I mean, Alex Yermolinsky usually was our standard bearer. He was always up for the challenge and did a great job. But the whole team as a whole was very balanced and really, came through on a consistent basis. They were medaling, pretty much every time.
Yeah, some of my best chess friends, and basically I was a fan during those days. I was never in contention to represent the United States, but I followed them very closely. And guys like Yermo and Fed and Nick DeFermian, Joel Benjamin, these are guys that I call friends now. So
yeah. Gregory Kaidanov and Boris Gulko were
another great guy.
But the tradition continues, and the last 2 online Olympiads, obviously because of the pandemic, they weren't being held in person, right. And scheduling they were held on relatively short notice, which precluded some of our very top players from participating. For example, the top 5 in the most recent online Olympiad, which was held a few months ago. But despite that, the teams have, this time we finished second, upsetting India. And I should say also the event is worth checking out. It was quite interesting. It was played on 2 open boards, 2 adult female boards, 2, and then 1 junior board and 1 junior girls board. So a little twist from the regular Olympiad, where there's separate sections for open and women's competition, and no juniors at all. And this worked out quite interestingly. And our team, was not really expected to maybe make the final 8, but nothing beyond that. But we managed to finish second. So in some ways, sometimes that result is more satisfying than even winning gold when you have all the big guys. I'll take them both, mind you.
Yes.
The U.S. has been blessed with a long tradition of excellence in team events.
Yeah, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit back more in depth because there's a couple other things that we have in common. But going back to the respect the world has of you, the fact that you were the captain of all those Olympiad teams, I think there's two characteristics about John Donaldson that I want people to know, is that the players respected you, and also that job requires an organizational skill, that, being able to rest players, being able to keep everybody ready to play. There's a lot that goes into being captain, if you're a good captain, which you reportedly were. I only attended one to witness it in person, but that was the reputation that you had, that you took care of all the things the players didn't want to worry about.
Well, I like to say that if the team does well, you should really blame it on the players, because the captain can't get in there and play for them. Yeah. But if the team does poorly, then the captain bears the fault.
That's right. You go down with the ship.
Right. But you mentioned that which Olympiad did you attend?
Was it one in Istanbul, early in the 2000s?
Okay, so I missed you because I wasn't the captain for that one. Every Olympiad, the players vote for who their team captain is. And in 2000, I believe the captain might have been
Christensen?
Yeah, I think it was Larry Christensen. Yeah. He did a really great job in '98 when the team nearly won gold and they finished silver. But what I would say to the audience is that if you ever have a chance to see, like if you got a bucket list of chess events to attend, and maybe the World Championship would be on it, I would say that even more enjoyable than a World Championship is going to an Olympiad, because it isn't just one single game. You've got 180 countries competing, and you've got chess officials from all over the world. You've got chess fans from all over the world. You have all sorts of chess book stalls and chess memorabilia. It's just a good way to catch a pretty heavy dose of chess fever, if you will.
Yeah.
And the next Olympiad is scheduled for Moscow sometime next year. That might not be the right time for most people, but the one following that in 2024 is in Budapest, which should be a lot more accessible. And that would be one I would highly recommend checking out. I mean, the events that are held in the center of Europe, which is sort of the home ground of chess, if you will, are usually always memorable, and the Hungarians have a big chess tradition. So I think that would be
Is it going to be in Buda or Pest?
I'm not sure. I don't know all the details. It's a little far out, in time, but
a great city to visit.
It's definitely near the Danube River, I'm sure.
Yes. That's when I was there. We were on a Danube River cruise, and that was one of our stops. But I think that the Olympiad was one of the highlights, and also for a chess fan such as myself, rubbing shoulders, getting to talk to some of those grandmasters from other countries, that was just great. That was a fantastic experience for me. And I was there because I was the U.S. I was the FIDE Zone 1 president. Were you a FIDE?
I was in Dresden in 2008.
2008.
That was once. That was probably enough.
That's what I felt too. So we had that in common as well. But the idea is that the U.S. Chess, which is the national governing organization, and FIDE, which is the the world governing organization, the U.S. has a representative in that, and that's our FIDE rep. And then FIDE itself it divides the world into zones, and you're supposed to represent FIDE in your zone. And the U.S. is so large that we have a zone to ourselves. So the zonal president has got to represent FIDE's interests in their zone. So I found myself saying that, this is what FIDE wants to do. And all the US players would go, no. It was like, So there you are in a rock and a hard place, and so that was not a particularly fun experience. But he got me to assemble, so I would always remember that. And
Mhm.
we had a lot of great FIDE. Like I replaced Grandmaster Arnold Denker, and had many long conversations with him about what it's like to be in FIDE. But I also Hypermodern Press published his book, Bobby Fischer, and that I knew, and other stories. And Denker was just a character all in his own right. But a lot of great players that are great chess people have taken those positions in FIDE. But you also were on the board of the U.S. Chess,
Yes, I served from 1990 to 93.
right? And I did 96 to 99. So I think I'm just following in your footsteps all around the
Yeah.
world. Or
Well,
we're
you're not learning from my experience.
yes. It was, never mind. I don't want to get started and say something I regret later. But yeah, some of those things are difficult experiences, and it's different than playing and being around chess players.
Right. I would interject that I think that right now the U.S. Chess Federation is doing quite well. I mean, well being relative, pre-pandemic they were doing really excellent. And
Yes.
what I mean by that is that the not shooting themselves in the foot, going forward with good programs.
Yes.
You know, and I'm sure that like many organizations, they're facing some challenges now because of COVID.
Pandemic hit.
But right, but once things lift, I think there's going to be a takeoff. There's so many young players that were probably inspired to play by the Queen's Gambit, or that become have become more keener from playing online. I've seen a lot of adults. I direct a Friday night tournament at the Berkeley Chess Club, and I see this trend recently where you have adults that are unrated, that are like in their 20s, like say a tech worker, if you will, and their first rating's like 1600 or 1800, and that's not the way it used to be. They used to, they'd pick up somewhere around 1,000 or 1,100, and then they work their way slowly up if they did. But nowadays they come in having played like hundreds, if not thousands, of games online. They've done all these tactical drills, and they're much more accomplished than the unrateds of old, if you will.
Yes.
So it's definitely a different chess world.
Yeah, I had a series called Unsung Chess Heroes, and I'm going to have if I start that up again, I'm going to have Chuck Unruh from the U.S. Chess Board, current board, their treasurer, on, because I think what they've really done so well compared to when I was experiencing is their finances are in much better shape. There's more transparency. They're just doing it with the pandemic.
Well,
they survived it.
Right. Well, I think that one thing I think of in the past is that in decades before, it always seemed like every so often something would happen, whether it be like a lawsuit, or it would be some dispute involving an employee and having to make a payout to preempt a lawsuit. There would always be something like that where they'd shoot themselves in the foot. And I mean, just there's tremendous goodwill from the USCF membership, and they're both in terms of like just their like lifelong commitment to chess, and they help in both their time and their money, and so there was always that great asset to tap. But on the other hand, sometimes they would sort of be these self-inflicted wounds, and I just don't see that happening anymore.
Right.
Knock on wood. And so everything seems to be running. From the outside, it looks quite good. So.
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't help with all this. It doesn't hurt to have Rex and Jeannie Sinkfeld in St. Louis, and
that's on to my next topic, John, because I'm running out of time. But I do want to bring up the Chess Hall of Fame and the St. Louis Chess Club. St. Louis has become the mecca of chess. It used to be New York City, without a doubt, for most of my chess playing career. And the Sinkfelds have done a tremendous job running the U.S. championships, women's championships. They've got all sorts of scholastic programs going on. There's nothing that they don't do. But they also built the U.S. Chess Hall of Fame. And part of my background, I was on the U.S. Chess Trust for 20 years. I was president for 10. And we nominate people for the U.S. Chess Hall of Fame. And one of the what we do is we get a recommendation. In the past, this has now changed, but from the Hall of Fame committee from U.S. Chess, and you were the chairman of that, or you were one of those people that we always looked for your recommendations. Before we would do any nomination, we would check with John Donaldson. And I'm just going to show off my World Chess Hall of Fame shirt. St. Louis, Missouri is in the bottom line. I don't know if you can read it, but that is a wonderful structure. If you get a chance to go to St. Louis, check out the St. Louis Chess Club or check out the Hall of Fame or both. What they have done in St. Louis is fantastic, and I could not have dreamed of it when I was growing up playing chess. But tell me about, how do you decide who gets into the Hall of Fame?
Well, there's as you mentioned, USCF members are welcome to nominate individuals. And then there's also a committee, and the committee's usually about 10 people, and it's a mixture of chess historians, people like John McCrary, who's the current chairman.
Shout out, John.
John Hilbert, who's arguably, I think, probably in my opinion, the greatest American chess historian. He's written many fine books published by McFarland Press primarily.
Yes.
And then there's Hall of Famers like Andy Soltis. Representing, he's also a chess historian and writer, but he's also a fine player as well. So there's this group of about 10 of us. Fred Wilson, the longtime chess historian and book dealer, is another member of the committee.
Shout out to Fred.
So at any rate, all these people get together and we discuss, and typically, we're looking for somebody that's, chess is different than other sports in that people have long careers, but we're looking for somebody who's on the, maybe on the downward side of their careers. So, for example, like Gada Kamsky was not inducted into the Hall of Fame while he was playing a world championship match with Veselin Topalov, but although he still plays at a very high level and is rated in the top 100 in the world, he did get inducted. Ditto for Alex Onashuk. It's kind of a who's who of American chess. You've got the world champions, Bobby Fischer and William Steinitz.
Yes.
You've got correspondents, world champions like Hans Berliner and Viktoras Palčiakas.
Yep.
You've got some of the top women players of all time like Diane Severide. I would expect that sometime in the not too distant future that Irina Krush and Anna Zatonsky will be inducted.
Irina Krush, 8-time women's champion, and I asked her about that once, and she said she's not done yet.
No, but not so easy. There's a lot of strong women coming up.
No.
Everybody's been making a big deal about our huge, and arguably so, list of top men, with Fabiano and with Linear Dominguez and Wesley So, with Levon Aronian around the corner, with Sam Shanklin and
I wanted to shout that name.
Jeffrey Zhang and Ray Robson and Sam Sevian, who did so well in the U.S. Championship. So there's all of them, but on the other side, there's players like Carissa Yip and this young lady that just came from, that's going to school in Missouri with the unpronounceable last name from Uzbekistan that goes by Begum, I think. I'm sure I'm even getting that part of it wrong, but there's so many. There. If you look at, it used to be, 20 years ago, if you were an expert, you could play in the U.S. Women's Championship. Now you got to be over 2,300, 2,350 plus. But one event I would really have people be on the lookout for is in 2022, the World Chess Hall of Fame will be holding a special exhibition on Bobby Fischer. They've had exhibitions on him before, but you can guess 2022, it's 50 years after Reykjavik. What will make this exhibition different is it'll be bigger and better. It will be on all 3 floors of the World Chess Hall of Fame. They've never done that before. All the other exhibitions have been confined to a single floor, but this will take a very comprehensive look at Fischer's career from beginning to end, emphasizing 1972, but also, explaining, like, how did he get good? Who were the people that helped him? What were the roadblocks that stopped him from, immediately becoming a world champion in the early 1960s? How did he break through? And what was his like after winning the championship? All those topics will probably be covered in the exhibition. And the World Chess Hall of Fame is very much interested in hearing about anybody that has Fischer-related stories that they were personally involved in, or any sort of Fischer-related memorabilia that they would
to mention that. I wanted to ask you about that. That's going to be a great event, and if you have any Fischer stories or paraphernalia, please get in contact with St. Louis. And we also wanted to mention that, and this is a picture of me and Joel Benjamin, who's the only person who's won the U.S. Senior, Junior, and U.S. Championships. But this is the Cairns Club that I was in St. Louis for. That's the championship for the women's now. So everything is changing, and so much goes out. So much of our we have to express our appreciation, deep appreciation for what the Steinfelds have done in St. Louis for U.S. chess. And John, is there anything else that I should ask you before we go? Because I am running out of time.
I think you covered it well, Jim.
Okay, thank you, John. This is my final episode for season 1 of the Chess Files. The answers are out there, and I wanted especially to have you on as my guest, because I think of you as a historian as well. Dates roll off of your tongue. You had 2 GM norms. Not to be dismissed as a weak player like myself, because I could fight with them, but I could, well, let's see. Yeah, I could fight with a grandmaster, but I couldn't become one. And it was one of those things, they're just too strong. There's Alex Yermolinsky, who you mentioned before. And I think that this is, you've been involved in all aspects of chess, from starting out in Tacoma to representing the United States in FIDE, to being an Olympiad captain, to being on the board of the national governing organization. So you're just the best guest I could possibly hope for to wrap up this season. And I want to thank you again and express my admiration for you and all you've accomplished.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me, Jim.
Okay, I'm going to take you backstage now and say goodbye.
Okay.
Bye, John. See you later. That was John Donaldson, a tremendous force in U.S. chess. And I can't really call him an unsung hero, because he's done so much for so many ways. And the E Foundation has been trying to do that much around the world. We've been doing our best to help others get started. And where they go from there, it's up to them. But we can get you started. If you can't access the internet chess community, we can get you started to build a community where you are. Just a second, I'm going to change my background. There we go. We can get you started building a community wherever you are. Whatever language you speak, whatever country you're in, doesn't matter. You can get started building communities wherever you are through chess. And that's what the Foundation is trying to do. Our guest was John Donaldson. He wrote the Bobby Fischer and His World. It's available now at all chess outlets. I'm sure you won't have any trouble finding it. I recommend it highly. I own it. I don't have it signed yet, but I'm going to get that done one day. And that's it for season 1 of the Chess Files. The answers are out there.